You're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening. Hello, lovely listeners. Thank you so much for joining us on the SKYLIT Books podcast. I'm your host, Nat, and today I am so excited to be talking to Becky Chambers about the Monk and Robot books, the second installment of which, A Prayer for the Crown Shy, will be out this month. By the time this episode airs, you will be able to grab a copy at SKYLIT Books. And without further ado, I will introduce her and then we will get started. Becky Chambers is a science fiction author based in Northern California. She is best known for her Hugo Award-winning Wayfarers series. Her books have also been nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, the Locus Award, and the Women's Prize for Fiction, among others. Chambers has a background in performing arts and grew up in a family heavily involved in space science. She spends her free time playing video and tabletop games, keeping bees, and looking through her telescope. Having hopped around the world a bit, she's now back in her home state where she lives with her wife, and she hopes to see Earth from orbit one day. Thanks so much for joining us, Becky.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Do you want to start us off by reading a little something, welcoming us to Panga?
I would love to welcome you to Panga. So I'm going to read a little bit here from A Prayer for the Crown Shy, which is, as you mentioned, it's the second book in the series. So a brief bit of context as we hop in here. So the books follow Sibling Dex, who is a traveling monk. The first book highlights their relationship with Mosscap, who is a robot that was built out in the wilderness. I am glossing over a ton of exposition here, but the humans of Panga, of the little moon that we're hanging out on now, have not seen or spoken to robots in several hundred years. It's been a long time since anybody had any contact with them. So the first book is about Dex and Mosscap's relationship and how they figure each other out and begin to grow together. The second book is about them leaving the wilderness for the villages of Panga and interacting with the different communities and people there. Mosscap is very eager to meet people because it hasn't met anyone besides Dex before. So we will start just a little bit of ways into the book here, where Dex and Mosscap are almost at their first village. The trees the village was tucked within were deceptively young. They towered majestically over the road, taller than any building outside the city, their layered branches creating a dappled lace of sunlight. But the age of a Keskin pine was expressed not in height, but width. The early years of saplings were spent exhausting every calorie sucked from both light and dirt on building themselves upward, trying to escape the shade of the lower forest for the brightness above. It was only after they'd spent years converting unfiltered sun into life-giving sugar that they began to expand horizontally, transforming into behemoths as the centuries drummed on. By their species standards, the trees in the place that Des and Mosscap had entered were slim teenagers, less than 200 years old. There was only one reminder of the giants that had once stood in this forest and would again one day. Dex stopped the wagon and hopped off their bike as they approached the village's namesake. An enormous stump, wide as a modest house, its spiring might cut clean away in the early days of the factory age, a time in which not much thought was given to spending 20 minutes on killing something that had taken 1,000 years to grow. There was a shrine to Bosch placed before the stump, a stone pedestal with a carved spear set on top. Small ribbons had been tied to it by countless passers-by, their colors faded and fraying in the open air. Dex had ribbon in the wagon, but did not fetch it. They merely capped their hand atop the mossy stone and bowed their head in greeting and reverence. Mosscap walked up behind them, observing. "May I ask why you do this, given that Bosch will not notice?" it asked. "Oh, the shrine's not for Bosch," Sibling Dex said. "It's for us. People, I mean. Bosch exists and does their work regardless of whether we pay attention. But if we do pay attention, we can connect to them. And when we do, we feel, well, whole." Mosscap nodded. "I feel that way with anything I observe in the wilds. And I suppose that's why I don't understand the need for this. No offense, I hope." "None taken," Dex said. "But you know the feeling I mean?" Very much so. I feel I connect simply by watching things move through the cycle. I don't need an object to facilitate that feeling. Well, neither do we if we remember to stop and look, Dex said. But that's the point of a shrine, or an idol, or a festival. I mean, the gods don't care. Those things remind us to stop getting lost in everyday bullshit. We have to take a step to tap into the bigger picture. That's easier said than done for most folks. You'll see. They paused for a moment, reflecting. You know, it's funny the way you said that. The way I said what? Mosscap asked. That you don't need an object to facilitate that feeling. Dex gave a single chuckle. You are an object facilitating that feeling. The feeling's coming from you, after all. Mosscap's lenses shifted, and Dex could hear a small whir inside its head. I'd never thought of it that way, Mosscap said. It put its hands flat against its torso, falling silent and serious. Dex watched the robot contemplate itself before the remains of the stolen tree, and likewise felt a thought take root. You know, you might be a powerful thing for people to see. How so? Well, it's one thing to be told about the world as it was, Dex said. It's another to see a piece of it. We have ruins and things like this. They nodded at the stump. But you're the farthest thing from a stone shrine. It's not like I ever doubted the awakening happened, but meeting you made it real no museum ever could. I think you'll bring a lot of perspective to the people we meet, even if all they do is see you walk by. Mosscap took that in. I hadn't thought about me providing them with perspective, it said. Well, that's what I'm seeking. Sure, but exchange is what you get out of any interaction, even the smallest ones. Everything has a give and take. Still, what you're saying is quite a responsibility. Mosscap folded its fingers together before its chest, and its eyes glowed intensely even within the brightness of the day. What if I make a mess of this? Don't think of it that way, Dex said. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you nervous. Yes, well, you did, Sibling Dex. The robot wrung its hands together and the whir in its head grew louder. I've never met any humans but you, and I know that doing so is rather the whole point of me being here, but now the enormity of it is hitting me, and I must seem so foolish. Dex shrugged. Honestly, I'm just surprised it took you until we were 10 minutes out to 10 minutes, Mosscap cried, clutching its face. Oh no. Oh no. Hey. Dex laid a hand on the anxious machine's forearm. The naked metal components were uniformly warm to the touch. It's gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. You'll do great. Mosscap looked at them, its lenses expanded wide. Do you think they'll be afraid of me? Or dislike me, perhaps? It glanced down at its body. Will they not like what I remind them of? Maybe, Dex said, with gentle honesty. But I highly doubt many of them will feel that way. And anyway, you don't have to worry about that. Why not? Dex smiled reassuringly. Because I'll be with you the whole way.
I could have just listened to you read the whole book. They're so wonderful, and I'm so glad that our listeners will get to hear a little bit of that. Especially if they haven't been introduced to Panga yet, if they haven't read A Song for the Wild Built, which is the first book, I think that will definitely intrigue them a little bit. And I'd love to start by talking about what I noticed in the world of Panga and these stories is that there is such a generosity just sort of flowing throughout you mentioned exchanges. Sibling Dex is talking about exchanges between them and Mosscap, and like there's exchanges, there's just the way that people interact with each other, the way that people interact with nature and the world, and the way that people allow space for things that they don't know or understand, which as I was kind of thinking about it after I read the books, it's not that I don't enjoy sci-fi, but I haven't read a lot of it. And so the ideas that I was having, I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure that these are a lot of ideas that are just sort of ingrained in the genre itself. But I'd love to hear about, I'm sure you might agree that there's like a ton of generosity in this story, and how you incorporated that into the way these characters see and interact with each other, and on this little moon, the way the nature interacts with each other too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Panga is the human territories of Panga, which of course are only half of the moon, because they've left the other half for the rest of the species that live there. But theirs is a post-scarcity society in which there was a massive technological revolution that happened a few centuries ago, because they were rapidly running into ecological collapse, and they had to change things. And changing the way that you use technology, that you use resources, that also requires a very deep change in mindset, attitude, and approach in your beliefs as well. And I think that I'm not going to be too prescriptive, but I'm incredibly biased here. But I think that in order to achieve that, you would have to embody a good degree of humility, and a good and the understanding that you don't know everything, and that this world is not for you specifically. You are a part of it, and there is, as Dex said, always a give and take. You cannot move through the world without influencing it, without changing it, without interacting with it. And so you have to be really mindful about how you do so, whether that be what you eat, or what you say to people, or what kind of home you live in. All of it has an impact on something, whether you see it or not. And so I wanted to show that is a core element of all the different societies in Panga, and it's how they're able to achieve this harmonious balance that they have found with nature. It's not perfect. And I also wanted to be clear that this is not a monoculture, right? I really dislike what you see in a lot of utopian fiction, this idea that there's this one size fits all approach to, how we're going to fix the world's problems, how a society should be run. That's not how anything works. We're all different. Mm-hmm. There are lots of different beliefs. You have to have different societies based around not just the cultures and the traditions that are there, but the environments, the microclimates that they live within. So despite how different the people of Panga can be, the one thing I thought it was necessary for them to have in common is that deep belief that you don't know everything. You have to make space, not just in a physical way for the things you share an environment with, but also in a the less tangible way of, you will be sharing this place with people who don't live like you, who don't share the same sort of extemporaneous beliefs that you do, but you still are in this world with them, and you have to find a way to make that work. And so everything in all the little interactions in this book, I've tried to reflect that as much as I can.
Well, I think not even in just the interactions, but in, Mosscap's great quest, which I don't think is a spoiler.
No.
People may want to know, because I'll say there was a little part of me that hoped that Mosscap would get an answer. But for our listeners, Mosscaps come out to sort of on a quest, and when it meets Sibling Dex, they're hoping to find out what humans need. And I think there's really no better way to kind of smash the idea of a utopian idea than by asking every single person you meet what humans need.
Yeah, I liked playing with that because when I set out to write these books, before I wrote A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is the first, I wrestled with it because, the whole problem with utopian fiction, right, is, well, what's the story if everything works? Like, what are you actually writing about if everything works? And I think that's a legit criticism, but I think it also presupposes that the only stories worth telling are the big ones, that the only conflicts worth exploring are, the big flashy sort of world-changing ones, when really those conflicts can be very quiet and very personal. The conflict in Psalm is Dex internally trying to figure out themselves and their place in this world, and this feeling of discontent that they have that they can't put a name to, right? So even though Dex is well taken care of, everybody in the world is well taken care of, and the fact that everyone has water, food, housing, all the things that should be basic human rights, that they are given the space to explore their interests and to get an education, all of these needs are taken care of, but people will still need things, right? You still will, have things you want to pursue in life. You will still make mistakes. You will still have regrets. You will still have questions. And so that was, I don't know, really the foundation on which I built these, which, okay, if we've taken care of the big stuff, then what's left? And so it just seems sort of a natural fit to me that I did actually have a character in the books that is directly asking that question and having trouble finding an answer, because it's not one that I can answer on my own. So, Mosscap does not get the same answer everywhere, and there is no easy answer to it. And Dex tells them from the jump in the first book that you're never going to be able to answer this, but Mosscap is determined to try anyway.
And then I'd love to talk again about something that I think is probably very common in speculative fiction. I'm curious about the power dynamics when you introduce sort of object characters as opposed to human characters, which Dex and Mosscap have a large conversation about when Sibling Dex asks Mosscap what their gender is. And it says that it doesn't have a gender because it's an object. And Dex is kind of just confused. And this is one of the situations in which I loved the space that was allowed for just so much listening and understanding that you're meeting someone or something where they are at. Dex has never seen a robot, has never talked to a robot, doesn't know anything but stories about the robots. And so rather than pulling from those stories, allowing Mosscap to let Dex know what their deal is, what its deal is, that was such a beautiful thing. And then at a certain point in this book, Mosscap is injured, you could say. And I really loved that Dex made sure, not only with the influence they had, but with the influence other people had to help heal Mosscap. Mosscap got the final say, regardless of the object human dichotomy. There was no power dynamic, essentially, and it didn't really seem like the people of Panga were still cautious about the robot because they had never seen one before, or in this small town that they were passing through. But ultimately, Mosscap got to make the decision about how it was taken care of or fixed, and no one else got to make that decision for them, which I thought was a really beautiful part of the book and the story.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a bee in my bonnet perpetually about a very common theme in stories about robots or artificial intelligence, androids, these sorts of things, which are, let's be fair, stories I have voraciously consumed in my life. I love robot stories, as you may have gathered. But often these stories have at least an element, if not the core point of the story, is that the machine wants to be human, that the best thing that the machine could achieve is becoming human, that the ultimate quest is to become like us. And I find this short-sighted, and I think that it's really reflective of what I see as a big flaw in our society, in that we and this has been the case for centuries, but that we see the world as something designed for us, that we see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution. We are the reason everything else exists. Everything is here for us to use. And I do not ascribe to that belief. And I think that, that whole conversation you reference, where Mosscap is explaining to Dex that it prefers the pronoun it because pronouns are something that people use, and it's not a person, it's an object, and it's offended by the idea of being referred to as something else because it takes great pride in what it is. And I think that thing that Dex is wrestling with in that scene is this idea that in order for us to value another being, not a living being in this case, but a thinking being, in order for us to value them, we have to see them as like us. And what Mosscap is saying is, I am not like you. I am not the same as you, but I am asking you to value me in the way that you would another person, but not to think of us as the same. And that's really the crux of it there. And I don't think this is an entirely alien idea for Dex, because again, they're coming from a culture in which non-human life is respected, in which the needs of other species are respected, in which there does not have to be utility in wilderness or in other species. They are allowed to just live because they have an equal right to life as we do. The challenge for Dex is to expand that thinking to something that is a machine. And it doesn't take them too long. Like, they get it, but it does they have to think about it. Yeah. They have to stop and they have to check their own biases, because they are trying to be respectful. They think they're being respectful by referring to Mosscap as a person, not realizing that assigning something an identity that it does not hold as its own truth is actually denying that being agency, is actually denying that being the right to tell you who it is that they are. So that was an idea I really enjoyed playing with in the first book, and continuing to play with in the second.
And then as we go with Dex and Mosscap on their journey, where you kind of left us when you were reading, where Dex says, well, why don't we go meet some people and see what happens? I know that this would obviously not be the intention, but it could have easily turned into that. And I'm sure that there are plenty of stories where this is the case. I'd love to hear about how that didn't turn into sort of like a traveling circus of sorts. There's so much compassion that Dex has for Mosscap, and making sure that it is okay and it is not being taken advantage of or hurt, and has said, like where you left us, I'll be with you the whole way. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to worry. But, and also when they get to one of those first towns, Mosscap is asking people, what do you need? What do humans need? And someone says something like, I need my rain gutters cleaned. and so Mosscap goes to do this. And Dex gets very worried and is like, I don't want it to just be doing people's chores. That's not what that is something that they need, but that's not the intent of the question that Mosscap is asking. So I'd love to hear, because I'm sure it was difficult to make sure that didn't become a sort of traveling circus. Look at this robot who is willing to help and will do your chores for you.
That was something I was incredibly conscious about in thinking about how other people were going to react to Mosscap and how Mosscap would react to them, because Mosscap is coming into this with not an immature, like Mosscap is definitely a mature thinking creature, or being rather, there's nothing, it's not a child, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it also is innocent in a lot of ways in that it doesn't understand human culture, it doesn't understand human society. And so everything it does, you know, it is in this very sort of fresh new rose colored glasses sort of way of like, I don't know what we're doing, but this is great. Dex is the one who sees that this could quickly become a problem if people think that, oh, there's this cool machine that'll, you know, fix your bike for you. Dex it puts a stop to that, you know, right away. But I wanted again to make it clear on the subject of power dynamics that Dex wasn't the one who approached the villagers and was like, you need to knock this off, because Dex is not Mosscap's keeper. Dex is not there to decide what Mosscap does. What Dex does in that scene is goes to Mosscap and pulls it aside and asks and says, are you okay with this? Is this what you actually want to be doing? Because if you don't, you know, I'll get you out of here. I wanted to make it, and that's why that's, you know, one of the first scenes in the book, is because Dex is always acting to make sure that not just that Mosscap is comfortable and that Mosscap is safe, but that Mosscap is making decisions for itself. Dex is incredibly uncomfortable with the idea of bossing Mosscap around, or of telling Mosscap how it should interact with the world. I thought that was a really key component of their friendship, that Dex is a sort of protector and a guide, but not in a paternalistic sort of way.
And then I'd love to hear about the in this last question I asked sort of falls into that, which you said there's a fine balance, but there are so many just like beautiful ideas in this book that are like you said, the world should, I want the world to be like Panga because it's not even utopian. It's just, there's so much, and it's not utopian, as you've said, and like there are still problems in it, but there's so much room for understanding and talking about those problems. And there are so many different things, like we could call them like hot topics or things like that exist within this book, or questions that are asked, but they are not prescriptive, like you said, in any way about like, this is what a good world would be like and how it would function. But they're brought up in ways that really just almost give you one little sentence that earworms enough to remind you to think about something in a different way or look at something differently. And you do so much of that within a very short little book too. And so I'm sure that was extremely difficult, but it's very much like a mark of an incredible writer, in my opinion, to be able to fit all of those things in and just sort of ask you questions, not tell you how to do things or where to go from here, but to go, like my intention after finishing these books was to go give them to someone else so we could talk about them. Like go read this short, sweet little book, and it will make you feel happy while you're reading it. You might not be happy afterwards because you have to go back into our world and leave Panga, but there is so much, they offer so much space for conversation, and that's part of that generosity as well. So I'd love to hear just about how you balance all of that.
As briefly as I can. Yeah, it's tricky. It is tricky to write what I think of as very, very simple, very intimate stories, but make sure that you know, there's plenty of nutrition in it as well. I never want to get preachy with my work, with this or with anything else. Like I never want to write something that's like, and here's the moral of the story, you know, here's how I think the world should work. I mean, obviously some ideas of what I think a nice world to live in are present here, but ultimately I don't want to offer easy answers. I want you to have something to chew on, and that's true in everything I've written, but with this series in particular, one of the ideas that went into it, but before I even started writing it, was I was looking at the way me and my friends had started consuming media in the late 2010s and early 2020s. I do not need to explain that this has been a very stressful time to be a person. And we all started doing this thing where, we're living in this incredible golden age of media, where there's all these new TV shows and books and video games, and just like storytelling has never been better, I think. But we were all watching kids shows, like cartoons or things we watched when we were kids, like sitcoms we grew up with, things that we've seen 20,000 times. It was because these things are comforting. There's no anxiety in it because you know exactly what it is you're going to get. And so all of us would say like, oh yeah, I can't wait to watch that new show. I've read such good things. And then we would go right back to rewatching whatever it was that, was our comfort binge. Or we would ask each other things like, does it end well? I've heard really good things about this show, but does it end well? Is it too, is there anything really rough in it? I'm not sure I'm in the headspace for that. And the thing is, I found myself often kind of struggling when I would sit down at the end of the day to figure out, okay, what is it I'm going to watch? What is it I'm going to read? Because I wanted something new. I did want something new. And I wanted something that spoke to me as an adult. I didn't want something that was still speaking to my childhood or teenage self. I wanted something that's talking to me here now in my late 30s, that provides me with some new fertilizer, as it were. But I was so tired, and everyone was so tired, that it was just easier to reach for the comfortable thing. And so I thought, can I write something that hits that note, that gives you that same feeling as watching a really good cartoon, watching something that you grew up with, that same comfortable, nothing is going to hurt you here feeling, but it's going to talk to you like an adult. It's going to provide you with a story that is tricky, and it's got some complicated bits in it, but it's also not going to tax you. And if you want to walk away and have things to mull over and to talk about it with a friend, it's there for you. But primarily what I want it to feel like is a break. So even if you don't want to have any conversations with it at all, I just want it to be a nice afternoon for you. And so that was the goal with these. And I'm happy to hear that it met that with you, because that was very much the intent.
No, it absolutely did. And like I said, there's so much to it definitely feels like a warm cup of tea going down, which I know was probably the intention too. And there is so much fun stuff and so many beautiful ideas in these books. I'm sure that there were so many more that just couldn't fit, or that will be coming up in future Monk and Robot books, hopefully. But I'd love to hear about some of the things that you had ideas for on Panga originally that just kind of either didn't fit into the world, or once you kind of got started, you realized maybe you had to wait. They wouldn't like, and you don't have to spoil anything, but that you sort of just realized like, I think this would be a great place to go, but these characters aren't ready for that yet.
That is the challenge with writing a novella as opposed to a novel, is that with novellas, you do by definition have to be short and sweet. And that was my contract for these was novellas, not novels. So, I really did have to think. Efficiently is such a cold word, but really I had to streamline it. The first thing that came to mind is a spoiler. It's a location in the first book that they originally spent a lot more time in, and there just wasn't room for. And whenever I encounter something like that, especially when writing a novella where I realize it's getting a little long, or maybe the scene isn't working, I have to take a giant step back and look at the forest and not the trees, and really look at what's serving the story here. And that's not to say that I think everything should be like, always like driving. Like, I do not write books with, like a big crunchy tense plot. That's not what you'll find in my work. And no disrespect to people who do write that. I do love that stuff myself, but that's not what I write. And so I don't mind hanging out in one spot for a long time just for the sake of something being beautiful, or just for, the sake of something being, hey, here's a neat idea. Where does this take the book? I don't know, but here. So, I'm not afraid of those sorts of things, but ultimately it does all have to play a role in the big picture. And so yeah, there were things like a location late in the book that that Dex and Mosscap go to that they were originally at for quite a long time. I really had to think about what sorts of places I wanted to visit in the second book, since the second book is all about their travels through the different villages. And so that went through a lot of different iterations. I probably wrote a whole second book worth of stuff, as opposed to what actually made it up, or what actually made it onto the page. And that took a lot of thinking about which of these places, which of the stories that could happen in these places are the most important, the most interesting, and the most different as well. I wanted to make sure it wasn't too samey all the way through, that everywhere we go, it's not just in a different environment, but we are exploring something a little different with these two. And so really separating the wheat from the chaff, with the possibilities there, because there's so many places you could go on a road trip. And so whittling it down to just a few was hard. But when I do that with anything I write, I never throw anything away, even if I don't use it for this project. I might be able to recycle it in a different form for something else 5 years from now. So who knows? So all of the bits that got left on the cutting room floor are still there. They still live on my hard drive. And we'll see where they end up in the future.
And then for creating worlds like this and coming up with these new ideas and things like that, do you do any kind of research, or is it all brain daydreams and night dreams and staring at the forest? Or do you, I'm sure it comes from just consuming stories about other worlds as well. But I'd love to hear if there's anything that particularly inspired these novels in this world, or if and not even because we talked a little bit about this, like I like this idea of a utopia, but I can do it better, but there's like, if I were to tweak it, it would look a little more like this type of thing.
Yeah, the level of research I do depends heavily on the project at hand. Monk and Robot is definitely more science fantasy than science fiction, in that, we're on a secondary world. There are gods, like there's a lot of stuff that's impossible. If I'm writing out and out science fiction, for example, I wrote a novella, To Be Taught If Fortunate, which is very much like science fiction. That one I did a lot of research for. My Wayfarer series I also did a lot of research for, even though that is slightly more in the fantastical direction, but it's still something that is based very much in the real universe as it exists, the laws of physics as they exist. I wanted everything in those books to feel possible, even if it's not probable. With Monk and Robot, I didn't do as much research as I have done with my other work, because a lot of it was based in things that I have either already learned about or places I have been. I didn't want it to be sort of a wiring diagram blueprint sort of sci-fi book, right? Like I didn't want to sit around and explain to you, here's how this solar generator works, and here's how the gray water system works. Again, it's a novella, I don't have time, but also that wasn't what I was interested in exploring. So, a lot of it comes from interests I have already had for much of my adult life, things like sustainable technology, green technology, biotech, and just fixing everything, to put it extremely simply. And a lot of it too is based on places I have gone and felt quiet, natural places, ruins, small towns, places like that. I'm lucky in that I'm pretty well traveled, which is a privilege. And I feel that it's important to communicate those experiences and the places I've been to other folks, because if it just benefits me, what's the point? So a lot of it was me sort of painting these abstract funhouse mirror versions of places I've been, places that made me feel content, made me think about things. I wanted to honor those places. Sounds a little cheesy, but I wanted to put down on paper the places I've been, the natural things I've seen that have really meant a lot to me.
And then I love to ask everyone this as a sort of two-part final question. First, what is a either medium or art form of any kind, not just writing, that you would love to try or experiment with, but you haven't yet, either because you haven't had the time, or there's a little bit of fear that it wouldn't work well or it wouldn't translate well? And then also, what work have you been consuming lately that has really filled you up with joy or made your world a little brighter?
Yeah. In terms of something I'd love to do, so I'm a huge video game fan, and sometimes I'm like, it'd be so much fun to work on writing a game or writing. Okay, this one is bucket list. I would love to write like a lore book for a tabletop RPG or something like that. My fear with doing this, though, is that games are my hobby, and I know all too well what happens when you make an activity you love your job, in that it becomes your job, which is not to say that I don't love writing. I really do. But there is something special about games for me, in that I don't have to sit there and think about how the sausage gets made. I don't have to think about any of the drama that goes along with it. I can just play a fun game, and that's really nice.
Yeah.
But I do think it could be a lot of fun to work on something like that. Things that I have consumed lately that I have enjoyed. The most recent book I read was Spear by Nicola Griffith, which was fantastic. It was so good. I just wanted to devour it. I wish it was like 3 times as long, not because it was lacking anything, but because it was just so good. Games wise, I recently finished playing Tunic, which is a absolutely charming and just wonderfully rewarding RPG that's got a lot of puzzle elements, but also just a beautiful world to explore. And it felt like a hug, that game. It was an incredibly challenging, frustrating hug, but it was great. And my wife and I just finished watching Our Flag Means Death, which is incredibly enjoyable and just it's just a sweet, silly show. And those are things that have definitely given me a little more battery as of late.
And then for all of our listeners who, after they hear this, when Prayer for the Crown Chai is out, will immediately be done reading both of the Monk and Robot books, do they have something to look forward to on Panga in the future?
So I am leaving the door open for Dex and Mosscap. I don't have any immediate concrete plans for them. Right now I'm working on a novel in a new setting, so I am working on something different at the moment. But yeah, we'll see where Dex and Mosscap end up in the future.
Well, we are so excited to see where they end up and what new worlds Becky Chambers has in store for us all. Thank you again so much for joining me and taking the time to chat with me today. And for all of our listeners, if you have not gotten your copy of the Monk and Robot books, you can grab one from SKYLIT Books or on our website, where you can shop 24/7 at skylitbooks.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.